evening. As a reminder, the science-based targets are essentially South Burlington's fair share of what it would take to get a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. The science-based targets are intended to support decision-making at a very high level, and I think that they did that for this group and for South Burlington. For example, one thing that was illuminated through that process is that South Burlington needs to consider electrifying a portion of the existing building stock, both commercial and residential. At the time, Tom presented a percentage, and if you saw in the worksheet, the percentage was yellow highlighted. And so it was yellow highlighted because the science-based targets, they need some more work. There's an assumption baked into that methodology that assumes the percentage is starting at 2015. And, you know, this is the modeling methodology that ICLEI provided, you know, as a service to the Regional Planning Commission. So more work needs to be done to kind of true up that percentage, because South Burlington hasn't been electrifying buildings since 2015. So
it's going to be like 8 or 9%.
Well, and then since then they did a revision to their methodology. So currently the corrected level of electrification of existing building stock is 10% or 11% on the residential side. So that's the floor. So we're gonna, through the next phase of modeling, go up from there to figure out, you know, if that's an appropriate, feasible lever for the city. So more modeling is to come. And so, you know, I just wanted to give you an update on that those percentages are gonna change. And, you know, I think we're positioned really well, hopefully, to get that work done by the end of April. One thing that I was concerned about was the transportation sector. In the science-based targets, we started the inventory at base year 2015, because that was the vehicle miles traveled that we had. And so that's evolved, and I just got vehicle miles traveled data from the Department of Motor Vehicles for 2020. And so I think that's really good progress, because that's a big chunk of the inventory, and you have to build the inventory in order to get the forecasted data for 2030 and 2050. So just want to inform you that, you know, the science-based targets were helpful, because I think it helped us to see what, you know, bold actions we needed to take, because the electrifying the building stock wasn't really part of the action list. And I think the science-based targets helped us to understand that we need to include that.
So Melanie, when you say electrifying the buildings was not part of the list, are you referring to commercial buildings, residential buildings, or?
So I think, yeah, so both of them, both existing residential and commercial. And so I think, you know, prior to the science-based target modeling that ICLEI did, we were all talking about electrifying new buildings.
No, not really.
No,
we're talking
we were
about
saying
electrifying
net
existing.
zero.
How do you do it? No, we talk about preferential tax rates or tax
Yeah.
people who haven't switched, like what are the levers that you have to get people to do that, right?
Yeah.
But it's.
It wasn't written out in the actions.
Really? I'm a good example. I'm
I
a
thought it
good
was, but
example
it's
of that. I mean,
Well,
I
yeah.
mean, you know, like my home is a good test case.
Yeah.
Of, you know, the challenges involved in converting an existing home.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know?
I don't think we need to get into a debate
Yeah.
about what was or wasn't.
Yeah.
I do think that there were statements though around heat pumps and activities, which is electrification. It may not have been stated
Right.
exactly in that
Yeah.
form, but regardless, I agree that the ICLEI science-based targets have have sharpened our pencils.
Yes, yeah. And so,
And we'll do
just,
so
you know,
further.
more modeling work needs to be done just to make it more relevant for South Burlington. So I just wanted to let you guys know that.
when will we get that information?
So ideally by at the April 27th meeting.
So you're gonna use the 20
The-
miles travel and tip that into what we need to do.
Yeah, so the base year will be
From
updated to be
2015 to
2020. Yes.
Melanie, can I just ask to make sure, I don't know if 2020 means data collected in 2019 or 2018. But we should be careful, given what happened in 2020, to not say, congratulations, look, vehicle miles dropped by 40%.
That
Right,
was-
so-
That's what I was gonna ask too.
Right,
It's like,
right.
what did 2020 information
Yeah.
on miles
So-
traveled look like compared to 2015?
In some ways,
That
if it's like
pesky
way
rain.
off, I'd almost prefer to just use 2015 because 2020 is way more of an outlier
Right.
than 2015 will be compared with where we are.
Right.
So just ask the
Okay.
question of the
Yeah,
of
no,
the
I
V-Trans data.
appreciate that thought process. Thank you.
Yeah, because I don't want to just say, look, it's all done, on to the next thing. I do want to say that, but I want it to actually be true.
Right, I mean, yeah, I mean,
I
we
mean,
can talk about this offline.
Yeah,
but
if there was a
maybe-
way to grab 2019, that
Yeah.
would be much better.
Right, well, we
because
just
that
got,
would've been- Cause there was definitely increases in traffic between 2015 and 2019. Everybody is, anybody who lives here, you can see how much more traffic there is just in the last few years. And until the pandemic and
yeah, 2020 is not a good year.
2020 was a weird. year.
Airport traffic really spiked too,
Mm.
right before the pandemic. They had more flights and planes coming in and out than ever before.
The data you got from Department of Transportation, from Vermont DOT, you said it started in 2016, going to today, roughly?
I think it
Or
only
beginning of
went
the year.
through 2020, so we
Wow.
have year 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020.
Oh, they said February 2016, so we'll have most of 2016.
It was only 2 months.
Oh.
It was January and February, or January and February of 2016, but we can
Okay,
talk
so
about
well,
this
let's
in
look
more
at,
detail.
we'll take a look. It sounds like that data just came in, so we'll do
Yeah.
some quick analysis on it and at least find out what kind of date range we have to work with. Maybe that won't be all of the data we have for transportation, though. That's just a light duty.
Maybe we can ask Melanie, you've got some very bright transportation folks at the CCRPC who can maybe broadly say based on their professional expertise, what do they think is the most recent, most valid information that we can be using?
Yeah,
Some adjustment based on larger trends of what 2020.
Or just,
Just
let's end it in November of 2019 and call it good, or whatever they believe is best, but that's their field of expertise, and I would love to lean on them for that if.
Yeah,
you think
yeah,
that would
I'll
be
check in with them. I mean, thinking about the pandemic effect, I think, having an inventory year that is as recent as we could get is beneficial because, energy efficiency improvements make a big impact. And so we want to account for those. So, I'm thinking maybe we do 2019 base year.
That makes sense.
So that's all I have. More to come. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so should we go on to hopefully not spend too long, but if there's any fatal flaws that anyone wants to bring forward about the buildings and thermal sector before we move onto transportation.
Are we accepting this format now?
I think I don't think we did that format actually, I don't know. I didn't see a format like that for, did you have that for buildings and thermal or just for
That's the
transportation?
only one it's been done for.
Oh, okay.
That's Andrew's.
So,
Andrew's latest, the latest iteration, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, this is
in
the
theory, the actions are the same from either of them, right? So
Supposed to be. I
my,
mean, I don't know, Don and Sweet, you can speak to, I know they were.
the actions are, this is always so hard to say. There's fewer number of actions because some of the issues or some of the items under those actions have been consolidated because they all fall under that same action. Because we're basing this on target.
yeah,
on target actions, you know, as opposed to policies and promotions and investments, you know, because some of the things that were listed as actions really didn't, it's hard with the definition of what is an action. I think that's where we've gotten very, very confused, because if it's a target action, it has to be one that there's greenhouse gas emission savings resulting from that action. And
Those are the
so
pathways, right?
the pathways, and then I mean, column 2. It would be helpful if we were looking at this one, because it makes so much more sense when you look at. If you're looking at it, you can see how a lot of
For a
these.
second? For those who are watching at home, this is a conversation that they don't have any background on because this was not sent out.
Sure.
Can either we decide to do an introduction of what Trini and Donna and Andrew put together or not? Because I think just for public transparency, we gotta explain what's either talk about it and give some background or don't talk about it.
Can you get it on the screen?
I
guess
can
I'm
do
gonna ask the
the
chair what-
summary if you want, I think pretty easily, if you
Okay.
want that for the
Well,
audience.
Well, we can summarize it. I guess the question that we need to answer right now is that I would sort of divide this into 2 questions, right? One is, how do we continue moving forward to work through all the sectors? What format do we use so we can all come to an agreement on the list? And then the sort of second question is that the task that we had tonight for buildings and thermal was, I mean, as it was presented, fatal flaws, right? So if someone walked in the door and they're like, oh my gosh, we lost the banned gas from buildings and it really had to be in there, like, let's get it back in there. I guess I was hoping for the purpose of time that we wouldn't necessarily have to go through every item and
Let me
reapprove
just,
them.
let me
I don't
say what
think-
this is about. Down, nice.
Yeah.
So there was, I think, a lot of confusion and crosstalk in all our meetings about what these terms mean. And so this spreadsheet was really an attempt to provide clarity, so we're all using common terminology. I actually think it's important. Because some people are using actions and pathways and targets and this to mean all different things. And as we tackle new sectors, unless we agree on that terminology, we're gonna continue to be confused.
And I think it's pretty clear that having this discussion about how we move forward with a format makes a lot of sense. I guess my question is, if the goal for buildings and thermal is just to go around the room and say, does anyone want to pull the, you know, the brakes on the whole thing and ask for something to be added back in?
No, but I
Do-
guess
do
what
we
I'm
wanna
saying is,
switch
that I
over
think
to
that,
this?
I think what, we should have that discussion too, but I think we should spend a minute going through this, because I think it will inform in a very useful way the discussions which we're going to have on the other sectors. So I think it's important in that, from that perspective.
So is the, just so I'm clear on where we're going with this, is this, are you suggesting that we do the sort of fatal flaws analysis using this format and sort of go through all the items on here again and reapprove them in this format?
I'm, well, why don't I describe what's on the spreadsheet and maybe you'll become clearer.
No, I mean, I understand what's on
Because
the spreadsheet. I'm just asking what you.
I don't
can
have
use it
any
for right now.
fatal flaws for the actions. I mean, there was, my intent in putting this together, not to change the substance of the actions we agreed to. I don't know if Srini, Donna agree with that. It's really just, so from a fatal flaw perspective, I don't have any comments on the actions.
I think from a project management exercise, I think the intent is here to approve the buildings pathways today. I think that was the expectation, right?
Right.
So from that perspective, I think we have the content. I think all the work that has gone behind the scenes is to basically rearrange those actions in a way that is more, that provides more clarity and that's easy to understand. That's the background work that has happened. So administratively, if you want to say, are we okay with the buildings? Have we captured everything? Yes, we have captured everything. That's how I feel.
Okay, so that's what I'm trying to figure out, because there's 2 things that we could look at when we put it up on the screen.
Yeah.
One thing is we can just look at the structure of it and not spend a lot of time discussing the individual actions and talk about whether we want to use it going forward. That's one conversation. The other is to go through each cell one by one and say, does this still capture what we meant? That's a very different type of discussion. I'm just trying to figure out which one we're trying to have. Yes.
I would argue that we want to have this structure. And the reason I like this structure is the way in which you group everything is very clear. So your actions are either weatherization, electrification, or net zero. That's it. Those are the three, and everything gets grouped as either a policy under one of these three areas or a promotional activity, you know, communication with the public, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's the way they fall. It's very easy. And you can do the same thing when you get to transportation. You can say all of transportation is either EV and EVs, you know, chargers, or it's vehicle miles traveled. And you can do the same kind of chart with transportation. So the reason I just wanted to see if everyone wants to endorse this layout, because then we can lay out transportation in the same way very easily.
Okay, so far,
I thought it was really clear.
You know,
I appreciated it.
good.
It's
I did too.
condensed and easy to work with and covers all the bases. And I mean, I'm assuming we've all read it and Ethan shouldn't worry about
Right.
fatal flaws because
well, I'm just asking,
Yeah.
the
So
agenda
honest-
item was check the box on fatal flaws. I want to make sure that everyone's had a chance to say, no, there are no fatal flaws, so we can move on to the next
Well,
things on the
just
agenda.
the reason
Which
why I'm just-
were explicitly.
I'm just parking that question, which I know we have to get to a little bit. Is because there were some changes to some of the actions, which honestly, I think on a smaller group basis, probably should be
I
reviewed
think,
again,
I think, if-
right?
I think.
But
if-
not as a fatal flaw, it's like to
Yeah.
conform.
Yeah.
And it was really because, like, I didn't have what you guys did in Excel spreadsheets, so I couldn't copy and paste. And so I just think there needs to be some conforming
Yeah.
stuff that's done, because it wasn't intended to change the substance.
Right, so that's my question. I mean, I'm fine changing formats, whatever you guys want is fine with us.
Yeah,
But some of the language in here is not
It's some of it's
consistent.
different, and so,
with what
but
we
the
have.
reason why some of it needs to be different, because like some of the actions in the existing spreadsheet combined, like weatherization, electrification,
Right.
and some of the intent of this was to draw it out a little more, like to have it clear that this is one thing, this is another thing.
And there's some actually new actions as well.
yeah,
There are some new ones, which,
yeah. So I think, Anne.
There was
if-
one, it could drop out again, but it was a
Yeah.
new action.
So Anne, I think if 2 or 3 of us spend half hour offline. we
That
can
would be the
clean
best
this
way to
up.
do it.
We can clean this up. I don't think it's.
I don't think it's worth a group discussion.
agree.
No, it's not.
Yeah, so,
That's all fine with me. What I really need from the city staff end though
Yeah.
is I need an okay to go out to the public with something soon. So,
I
you
think
know,
it needs
if
to
you
be
want to
that
endorse
small
a
group
small group to do
discussion,
it,
yes.
yeah.
but then the whole group needs to say whatever those 3 people say is fine.
I see.
Or you bring it back
Whatever
to the
those
whole
3
group.
people say is fine.
But, you
In
know,
the
I just wanna,
interest of
you know, I
time.
just wanna be very
Yeah.
clear about what you're expecting, because, you know, when it goes out to the public, it will be. It's a first draft, it will obviously have the ability to change, but I don't want anybody to be surprised that we're sending it out.
But this is what you're gonna send to the public.
Well, it may not be that format, that's the thing, is we're gonna, you know, we're gonna have to think about social media, about lots of different things that break things into small manageable bites for folks.
Yeah.
So what I need is the content. This is a wonderful format, we're very supportive, but when we do outreach, it may not be in this, you know, what's your comment on this very dense spreadsheet? Because
yeah.
we'll get 0 good feedback on that.
Right, my understanding was that the format that you guys were proposing was something that this group could use to facilitate this conversation and gather ideas, refine ideas, and come to a consensus that, okay, we've covered all the bases and we've communicated everything, like we have a plan. Not that it's necessarily has to go straight out the door to the public that way.
No, but it's more than that. It's also gonna be the format that drives how the plan is constructed, how it's written, how it's defined, right? This is really important to frame this, so that we have a common language when we get to actually draft the plan.
That's
Yeah.
right.
It's not just for our
yeah.
workspace
So,
use.
so every other climate action plan starts with the strategic action, which is the first column, that's a strategic action. Then it lists a bunch of supporting actions. And it earmarks those actions as policy or investment or whatever. And then it goes on and, you know, strings to the relationship around investment, who's gonna do it, you know, what's the equity complexity, what's the socioeconomic complexity. Every one of the climate action plan follows that scheme. So I think all has happened in this format is kind of aligning to something that is already out there. This is not something new, so I just want to comment on that, so.
Sure, yeah, it doesn't seem to me that the structure, that the like components that we're associating with the actions has changed dramatically. It's been
Yeah.
reorganized so we can see how they relate to one another
Exactly.
and how we sort of filled out within each one of the areas of interest. And I think Paul's point was that when we go out to the public, we don't necessarily, for all circumstances, have that exact spreadsheet that has
Oh, for
everything
sure not.
packed in there the way that
Oh, for sure
in
not.
this meeting, we may want to have everything so we can sort of see like, do we have the universe mapped? And
Right,
so,
but this will define the language that we use when we go to the public, right? So it will define what we mean by pathway. It'll define what we mean by actions to support the pathway, and then it'll define what these targets are. And that should be the language that we use. Obviously, this is too dense.
have pathways, so I mean, the language on there is pathways and actions, and
And
we had
targets.
pathways and actions and targets in the original draft that we went over in a lot of detail and had a lot of discussions about definition. Are there any significant changes to the meaning of pathway,
Yes.
goal, and action that we need to be
It's
aware
not
of?
goal. The goal's not on here.
Yeah.
So pathway is I mean, best I can really say is high level, but I think by looking at it, you kind of get a sense of what it is, right? There's 3 pathways as defined for building thermal. One is to, a building performance standard pathway, including weatherization, LEDs, right? Everything that goes into efficiency of a home. That's one pathway. The other pathway is to electrify existing stuff. And the third pathway is to not build new stuff with fossil fuels, right? Those are the 3 pathways. Within those pathways, there are targets, right? Based upon the IGLE work, what are the targets that we can set within each of those pathways, and then actions to support those targets.
Yeah, some of the targets are different for commercial, some of the
Yeah.
targets are different for residential, so I think. we
So
just
that's
need
how
to
this
make
tries to lay it out, the
Yeah.
terminology.
I understand how dense this is, but I still think this is an important document for the public to review. I mean, I'm sure not every single person is gonna read through the whole thing and say, oh yeah, I really understand this. But I think this lays out the big picture. It's a draft. It's a variety of potential policies the city might embrace or needs to embrace. So I put this, once it's, you work with CCRPC and you get the language corrected or the
Sure.
changes. I think this needs
Yeah.
to go.
And I didn't mean to say we weren't gonna put this out to the public. I just mean we may also break it out to get meaningful feedback on individual
Yeah.
pieces.
For sure, and you could break it out by color
Sure,
and say, this is one of the pathways. and
Right.
These are,
yeah,
but I
But we don't,
mean, you can read this and it's pretty clear too.
yeah, that's
we
good,
don't, but we don't need to decide on the public outreach tonight, right? Like,
sure, I
the goal
understand.
of this, sorry to be concerned, but like our time on buildings and pathways took twice as long as we thought it was gonna take to get there. And
Well, are you
we're,
intending for this to go to the public before we get the targets from IGLE? Because that could be a little misleading if the targets double,
Yeah,
you
right.
know, I mean, like, I think we kind of need to know what the targets are, science-based targets
I
before we
mean,
share
we'll
this.
follow what you want to do with it. I guess the more that it backs up, the less chance they will have. If you get something meaningful that then needs to be evaluated, it
Keep
can't be
moving
in
those
July.
targets around.
but I thought the first phase of public outreach was not to tell them what the plan was. The first phase of public outreach was to gather input about what are people in the public concerned about? What do they want us to prioritize? And I feel like we keep pushing back the date of the first public, or there's 2 phases of public outreach. Because we as the Energy Committee, actually, Andrew pushed for this, because originally it was just go out and tell people like, hey, we've just decided what we're all gonna do for the next 10 years. Everyone get on the bus. And we came back and said, maybe we should ask where everyone wants to go and say,
No,
we
but
can't
how's
stay
the public
here,
gonna
right?
know where to go unless
Yeah.
we tell them what the science-based
Yeah,
targets are?
Andrew,
I
this
think
is-
The
Probably-
public is not gonna give meaningful feedback if you give the public that broad
yeah,
a scope.
Andrew's right, I think you have to do some context setting.
Yeah.
The context setting is the following, I'll give you a 2-minute spiel on what the context setting should look like at a very, very high level. Greenhouse gas emissions for South Burlington is 200,000 tons. 40% of that is represented by buildings, okay? And it's not, it's existing buildings and new buildings. If we build at the current rate, we are going to be adding 5,000 tons a year on top of the 40,000 tons. So we have to work on new buildings and we have to figure out a way to reduce the 40,000 tons. The way we are going to reduce the 40,000 tons, we are going to weatherize old homes that are poorly insulated. We are going to electrify as much as possible. And then we are going to make sure that we have a roadmap for building new buildings without fossil fuels.
That's it.
And this is how the 40,000 tons breaks out.
I think we need to give that roadmap, and I'll go one more detail, and I think we need to say, we need to electrify 8% per year, whatever the number is.
Exactly.
And then with that context,
Yeah.
from the public.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the public's not gonna know how to react, or what
And
to do.
8%
mean, this-
in terms of
This
number
may
of
not be the
homes.
first
How
time that
many is
everyone in the public has heard about climate change.
Yeah, but they
But I
haven't
don't
seen,
think-
they haven't seen numbers.
I gotta
that
tell
seem
you, the
real to them.
10% is like,
You know?
knocks me on the head, and I've been doing climate change for a long time.
Yeah, it's like how many houses, 10% is just a number, but 10% of, you know, of
And
5,000 homes?
Yeah. And
You know,
let's,
is that what we're talking, you know,
and let's recognize that
10,000
Tom,
10,000
no,
homes?
Tom said that our current run rate is about 1%. He said 6% is a stretch target from what he has seen from other communities. Now you're saying it's going to be 11%, so you need to clearly articulate saying how big a challenge this is.
Well, and I think part of the challenge we're gonna have, and this
Yeah.
sort of going back to the targets, is the way that Tom presented it was to try to give attainable things for communities. He may say, we can't realistically do 12%. Therefore, something else that, you know,
Sure.
it needs to be done instead. And I
Whatever
don't
it's
know, you know,
gonna
we're
be,
sort
but
of running out of the
if we
something
will,
else.
we'll come up with, at the end of the day, a plan
Yeah.
that they believe will get there by pulling these levers. And that's the plan, those targets that the public needs to see to react to.
But again, this sounds different, right? The plan to react to, I thought, was like, once we have specific actions to take, and there was still a phase that I thought we were gonna propose at the beginning, that was the first half of Srini, what you were saying, which is, we're on an unsustainable path. We need to make drastic cuts. We know that a lot of the emissions come from buildings and thermal. What concerns do people have? What interests have you heard about? We're not, I mean, my understanding of gathering information wasn't that we expected that we were gonna come back from that with a quantitative plan for, you know, here's how many heat pumps we should order of this brand at the end of that meeting, right? It was that people would come back to us and say, well, I'm concerned about this, or like, I've seen some other, you know, opportunities here. So that we could then factor that in, right? I mean, I think we keep assuming that we already know what the public is gonna say and what they're gonna know. And the whole point of the listening sessions was, let's be surprised, let's
Well-
not tell them too much.
Well, I don't think it's really fair to go out to the public without saying, look, this is what we anticipate the target savings have to be. And this is how many, you know, houses have to be weatherized to achieve this, because when I talk about climate change with people, they come back to me and say, yeah, we should turn down our thermostats. And I said, oh, it's much bigger than that. It's much, much bigger than that. You know, think, you know, you're gonna change the way you heat your entire house. And, you know, you're gonna, you know, if you know, your dryer, your gas dryer, you may have to, you know, you may have to put a clothesline up somewhere, God forbid, you know?
Change the neighborhood policies.
Yeah.
So without trying to solve the whole problem, are we on track to be able to have a public session before the end, or what is the threshold to be able to get there? Because
I think we
a
need
lot
the
of these questions-
science-based targets. I don't think the actions have to be completely completed, done. We can hear feedback on
Yeah.
those.
Right.
But I think we need to be able to frame it and give people a foundation.
Yeah, can we just do building? Just focus on building and get that done
Let's do the one
first?
first.
I don't think so, because you have to build the whole existing inventory based on current conditions before you can do the forecasting. And, you know, the forecasting is based on what you think is feasible. So I think what Andrew said, you know, if the 10% of electrifying the existing building stock is not feasible for South Burlington, then let's try and pull a different lever. Or
Maybe
let's
like
just-
possibly a transportation. level.
Right, so it would
So-
be a different sector, you know, so we haven't done the iterative process to see
Okay.
where we're,
But you can
We're
run,
gonna
you can
land.
run 3 scenarios for building status quo, 6%, which is what Tom said is, stretch target, and 11% is like an unbelievable target, and somewhere in between 6 and 1%.
Or
And
could we,
say that this is what-
could we do the buildings and put a placeholder?
Yeah.
We don't know exactly what's coming out, there's some levers. Transportation, honestly, are there that many levers? I mean, how quickly can you electrify all the cars? And I mean,
Right.
we've got a limited set of levers, you put a placeholder 9 to 10 in brackets, and at least the community can see, hey, that's a lot.
Right, I mean,
And if it turns out to be 11 or it turns
So-
out to be 8,
so
like, all right.
given that, I mean, this is a suggestion, I'm not advocating either way. I mean, so we have the science-based targets that ICLEI gave us. And it's one scenario.
But it's from 15, you said.
So it starts from 2015. I mean, and it's one
That's-
scenario and it,
But it's just wrong, though. It's
well,
not from 15. Right? I mean, normal, it doesn't include
Yeah.
everything that's been built for 15 and assumes actually things have been.
right, I mean,
Well, I mean,
We're
it's
gonna get the
really
new one
off.
within a couple of weeks. We're not gonna have public listening session in less than 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
No, we aren't. Let's,
Right, but remember that, the public input isn't necessarily listening sessions. It's gonna be a lot of, we've got to sort of figure out what the most efficient way to get as many people as possible, and maybe sort of online surveying, things like that, because the number of people who will come physically to
Oh,
a
yeah.
meeting is gonna be this many, and we can get a lot
Yeah.
more. I sort of like, maybe we can see, you and I can talk offline about when we can realistically have it. I sort of like Andrew's idea of, honestly, whether we're talking about 7% or 12%, it's an astonishingly large
Exactly,
number
yes.
either way.
right.
And the feedback is gonna be really on the actions. What do we need to do?
Yeah.
What
Right.
do you know that we don't know about actions?
This
about what
bracket,
to do?
8 to 10.
Yeah.
It's like, we'll figure it out, but like, just know this is the order of magnitude.
It's an
It's
attention
probably
grabber.
good enough.
can I suggest something just to move forward? Then are we happy with Andrew and a couple of other people cleaning up any of this? But this is the format we're going to use going forward. So this is the format for thermal, and you're gonna just do a final review and turn it up, and we're gonna say, okay. And when we transform, we'll discuss transportation tonight, and we will then put transportation in this format. We are going forward with this format.
Alright,
Everybody agree?
Can I actually ask a question about the format? So the last iteration of buildings and thermal,
Yeah.
there was a specific request about identifying the types of buildings that an action is applied to. And so we have a separate column for that. And so I don't want to lose that in this format. So my question is whether that column needs to be included in here. And we also
You
had,
mean commercial or residential when you say?
yeah,
type?
whether it was owner occupied, residential, condominiums, rental properties.
I think
We
they
also had
identify.
other columns in the old format, equity, likelihood, feasibility, government influence. or, Like, what is happening with those?
Who knows what's happening with equity? I mean, we never talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Melanie, on your earlier question, what I would say is there is a benefit in looking at the problem from the subgroups of the building. But for this exercise, maybe we just stop here. For the next phase of the exercise, we can break it
For
down.
implementation.
Yeah, implementation plan.
Yes.
That's otherwise
Okay,
we will
I'm
lose
I'm
more,
fine
yeah,
with that so long it's workable for
Yeah.
you. And so this concept about
yeah.
categorizing the building types will be something that gets picked up in the
I mean, this does
implementation part.
differentiate between commercial, residential and new.
Yeah.
And you can then titrate down to
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah.
condos versus single
Yeah.
family.
It looks like.
and
you
I would
did
envision that over time, eventually, each one of these boxes under
Yeah.
policy, promotion, investment is the heading for a whole page worth of stuff of
That's about right.
the details, what are the levers, what power do we have authority to do over it now? What are the obstacles, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, I think you definitely, I mean, that's where you really reflect the public comment when you have
Yeah.
included in this the challenges, the concerns,
Yeah,
what are the pushbacks,
Yeah.
those kinds of things.
Might it cost a few $1 trillion?
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, the investment could be enormous.
Yeah,
On that column of investment, it's
Sure.
just gonna balloon with the new estimates.
And if nobody has, if anyone here in our group hasn't yet reviewed the Montgomery County Climate Action Plan, because that's where a lot of the organization is coming from.
Could you make sure that everybody gets it? I haven't.
Yeah,
Can
Srini
you
has
send it
the,
out to
Srini has the
everybody?
I'll
copy of
forward,
it.
yeah.
Srini has it. He could
Okay.
just send it to the whole
Yeah, because he had it as a
task
link,
force.
so I don't know if that link
I
expired
can send the
yet.
PDFs as well as the links, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, because it really is, it breaks it down, just like Paul was just saying, you know, each of those sectors has a paragraph. And reading it, there's some awfully valuable information in there too. You know, we were talking about how do you stop builders from using natural gas? There's like a half a page about what happened in Montgomery County, Maryland, you know, to do that. It's very, very informative.
And just to be clear, that would probably become an implementation phase, just to be clear of, you know, what the scope of our
The
folks
whole
here is.
report, yes, but
Right.
understanding the way it's organized
yeah,
gives
yeah.
you a better idea of how this came about, you know, how this kind of format, and you know, where the detail gets picked up and how the details are organized.
Yeah, I mean, there will definitely be context and background information about each of the actions. But a lot of the nuanced information may become subsequent to the principal plan and in the
Yeah.
implementation plan
Yeah.
to actually identify what is the specific tactical thing that the city is
Right.
going to do
Right.
to get there.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea with the principal plan was at a high level, what are the actions?
Yeah.
What is feasible for the city? What's the appetite for doing these things?
Right.
And then the implementation plans, you know, are conceptualized to be broken out by sector, and that, so there'll be more information, even more context in those implementation.
And that comes in a second phase with like city staff does that or,
We're bringing together the resources. It depends on the sector.
okay.
Okay,
But
so
we're finished after we just get the high level plan. We're done.
that's the task of this group at this time.
Yes.
Whether the council later says we would love for some version of you to reconvene, then, you know, they would invite you
Everybody's
separately.
looking at the door.
10 more sectors.
So are we ready to take a vote on approving this format
Yes.
to move
With
forward?
any edits that they,
Well, to edits
oh,
the
the
content.
format, yes, let's approve the format.
Yeah.
I move that we approve this format for all of them.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? All right, approved unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so
Just for a quick note, Bill Wargo said he was not able to attend, but did like the format as presented, so he was also.
Awesome.
thank you. Okay, yeah, good to know.
Good unanimous support.
So do we want to delegate a few people to harmonize, make sure that everything is that all the content that we had in the old list is now
Since
reflected in
Andrew
the.
wrote this, I think Andrew should do it,
Well, I think the
whoever
three of us
else.
should-
Yeah,
should
we
do it
three of
with-
you.
We'll
Okay.
sort of
The three of us
collaborating on
will
it.
Good,
align with
thank you.
Anne and figure
Yeah.
this out, yeah?
Can I ask you if there are places where you found that you needed to make changes that are more than just like the part of speech or something like that, that you could call those out as a diff so that when we come back to approve it, that everyone, you know, doesn't have to try to do
Okay.
that on their own, because
Okay.
If there's anything substantive,
You just
Right.
bold it.
Yeah,
so
bold it,
it's-
okay.
stands
Okay,
out.
so just to be clear,
Rather
for
than have
the
another
purpose
color on
of the
color.
minutes here, there'll be a subgroup of whom,
Three of us with the hand.
Those three.
and to work out, make sure that it's consistent with what had been done to be brought back for preliminary approval on the 14th by this
Yeah.
group. Is that
Okay.
correct?
And I was suggesting specifically to have a diff rather than just bolding it, because in some cases it sounded like you'd split or combined things, and so.
if it's split, it doesn't really need to be bolded, right? If it's the same
Right.
content, but
It's
it's a
the same
split because it has to align.
Right.
I think it should be bolded if it's different and
It's a
and
new
substantive.
concept. or an
Okay, I just thought it'd be
additional-
helpful to know what it was different from, without having to track down where it came from, but,
Let us use our judgment as to whether it's substantive enough to raise.
right, just communicate with the changes so we can see it.
Can I just ask one clarifying question? It's great that we agreed on this format. I like it. Was there agreement that policy, promotion and investment would, because the actions don't relate to each other? Does it make sense to kind of make them more vertical and add a column that says
So-
type and then we
so
say
other-
policy,
That's fine,
promotion
I like
and
that.
investment?
That would then facilitate adding more columns more
Yeah.
easily. I like that.
So from a document management perspective, all other climate plan, action plan, what they have done is they have labeled them with a hierarchy. So building, for example, building will have 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, so that specific action, you can track it all the way down as you define more and more attributes around it. But that's how they managed it.
Are the rows here, when we have one row that has a policy, a promotion and an investment?
They're not
They're not
labeled.
intended to that, but I think that what you describe is a better way to organize this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So
so
they need
have
to go,
Yes.
another
Great.
page 100 here that says target with
Yeah,
promotion, target with existing initiatives under
Yeah.
there so that it can
Yeah.
track that.
I would encourage all of you to look at the, benchmark CAP. It makes it so much easier why it is organized this way, that way, so.
yeah, and I think they also need
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah, that's what I. the
Okay,
hierarchy,
let's
that's
not
what-
get in that deep
Yeah,
into the
let's
weeds
not-
here.
we don't have to
because
do that
This is what we should absolutely not be doing as a group of 14.
So, I guess my next question then is, I haven't seen a version of this that reorganized the transportation. Did I miss that? Or, okay. So what does the group want to do then? That we have a list of transportation items that was part of the packet tonight. There was some feedback provided on that. It is in the old format or
That's fine.
version of the
You can
old
work with
format.
that, yeah,
That's
no
fine.
problem.
Is everyone okay to work from that?
Yeah.
I mean, as long as people are clear, that it's gonna get translated into the format. That we're just talking about the measures right now.
It's the one with
Individual
the
action.
3 columns. and the
Yeah.
numbers.
Yes, with a lot of red on it.
Yeah, the only
Well,
thing that
I thought I was printing it with color and it didn't come out. so I
Oh.
just made sure.
The only thing that I think we potentially should be aware of is that the old format has a column for the metric that for periodic monitoring of that particular action. The new format only has a metric for monitoring the entire pathway.
That's true.
So, I mean, I think there's some good stuff in the metrics. I don't know if
It's a question of whether that's an interpretation detail too, if it used to be actions, I mean, because it'll be pretty self-explanatory too, right? For the actions.
Like for the first 4 of them, it's the same metric, right?
Yeah, in some cases, the metrics are the same for all of them, in
The
some cases
first
it's
4 of
not.
them, so maybe if there is an exception, Ethan, we can flag it.
Well, I guess, I mean, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong.
Yeah, of course.
You want me to bring the other one back to the screen?
Yeah, and I'm not sure, that the metrics, I mean, if I were to suggest metrics for some of these, I don't know that I would necessarily have picked the metric of number of electric vehicles registered annually. That's pretty far disconnected from some of these. So if we're going to educate student drivers, we want to track how many student drivers went through an EV education.
Yeah, maybe it's the wrong metric, yeah. you're
Yeah.
right, you're right. You're
No,
right.
I guess that's definitely true if we want to, once we implement the action.
I'm okay with it being in the implementation,
Right,
but
I
I'm
think
just
it's
saying that
implementation
there
as well.
there is potentially a meaning to metrics being at the action level. We just need to decide.
Yes, but I guess
decide
the,
on how
I
I
guess
push
the
it on.
point is that this framing, it probably makes sense to leave the metric at the pathway level. And then, because there's gonna be so many actions, how many are we gonna take, and it'll kind of become obvious what the metric is for the action if it's decided that that's one to implement or a set of them.
So the question then I think just procedurally, so we can get into looking at these, do we want to discuss metrics at the action level here, or are we just ignoring the metrics because we're pushing them off to implementation phase?
I would put them to the implementation phase.
Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah, it's information that you're gonna need at some point, it does relate to the targets. Because, well, for instance, if you're talking residential single-family homes and weatherization, and if you have the metric for that, then that helps you translate into the science-based target.
you know, some do and some don't.
Yeah.
That one more
In
directly.
transportation, I think it probably does a lot more.
Yeah.
Because like you're talking about, you know, city-owned vehicles, that you have a pretty good idea how many of those there are probably. You talk about commercial vehicles, and it's like, do we have any sense of how many commercial vehicles are, you know, even licensed in South Burlington, much less
Yeah.
come here,
I
you
think it's
know?
things like number of chargers that have very concrete metrics, but they're
Number
not
of-
directly linked to
To greenhouse
greenhouse
gas
gas.
saving. That's true.
They're strongly correlated.
They're strongly correlated, but
But we're
yeah,
not gonna try to do any math on
yeah.
it, right? So,
right.
okay, so it sounds like the decision though is this group doesn't need to try to establish metrics for each one of those because that's gonna happen during the implementation phase. We'll figure out metrics at the pathway level that directly correlate to the pathway goals. And that'll fit on the new format, so we don't need to look at that column. That's all I was trying to ask here.
Great.
Hey, Paul, could you zoom in just a tad so the action is just
Yeah.
a little bigger? Sorry.
It gets worse when I put on my glasses. I'm
I
like,
can't quite see
I'm
it.
thinking, it's like, that's not making it any better.
So for transportation, the only pathways we have are um, electric vehicles and
That's good.
charging stations, that, and then we have vehicle miles right?
Yeah, on percentage of fossil fuel. reduction. Well, that's.
No, that's
that's
BMT.
another, sorry.
Well, Helen, maybe to your point, there isn't a pathway to increase the miles per gallon of internal combustion engine vehicles. I think that's intentional, but that's the other one that would be reducing the amount of fuel without changing to EVs or reducing vehicle miles traveled, is going from a 28 mpg car to a 33 mpg car.
Oh, I see, okay.
Well, switching to hybrid is still a viable option for the short term, for some people.
So
Yeah, it's
that's the question, right?
That's
Yeah,
it.
if you're driving a 24 miles per gallon sedan, if you buy a Honda for 45 or 50 miles, that's a significant improvement, right?
Yep, and I think, I'm assuming the reason why the ICLEI science-based targets don't include that is
Yeah.
because every
Yeah.
car you buy today is gonna be on the road for 10 years.
Exactly.
And
Right.
that, 40 mpg car is gonna be horrendous 10 years from now when
Right,
we're looking
but
for.
it's still an improvement over a 20 mpg car,
Yeah.
that somebody, especially if we think from an equity perspective,
Yeah.
it's
exactly.
just beginning to come online,
No.
that the resale market is moving into hybrids, and that is that's a positive thing to help people to do who are looking for a used car that's 7 years old.
Can we actually make sure, at least maybe I'm the only one just to understand, does ICLEI model this point,
About the fuel economy
Yeah.
improvements. I don't know off the top of my head.
I didn't see that in the report.
As I recall, what they said was that there is background information that they are assuming happens at the national and federal
and
level.
so they are
that
they are
we don't.
I would think
incorporating
that
it
they
into
do.
the model
Cafe.
by looking at the scheduled cafe standard improvement. So
Right.
it is baked in.
I would be surprised if it wasn't.
Now,
So,
whether
but
at
if
the
they're-
local level, we've got something of encouraging something that, is there something?
No, I
we
know,
can
but
be
if they're
to-
baking in that our greenhouse gas emission reductions assume that our our kind of South Burlington mileage mirrors the national cafe standards, and then they are incrementally computing how many EVs you would need on top of that to get to where we need to be, then we don't really need to talk about the fuel economy standards, because it's already baked in. We just need to talk about the incremental.
Right, the amount of difference that we could make by going out there and talking up hybrids is probably pretty small compared to some of these other things that we're.
But more importantly, it's already baked into the modeling. So
Yeah,
Some
we
some of
think
it is,
so.
but. we
It would
could-
be more on the education side, like encouraging
Yeah.
residents and employers to make the switch to something that's more.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think in many cases here, looking at getting more chargers out there, the implementation of getting more chargers out there will help, whether we're talking about a plug-in hybrid or
Sure.
fully electric.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's like a little bit of an acknowledgement that some way that the action will also help the transition, those in the, who aren't fully electric.
So maybe for point of
Because
clarity,
it's the same
Kind of
action
a
for us to do.
a soft pathway without a target.
so I guess in my mind, what's shaping up is when we see EV on here, we can read it as whether it's a 100% electric or whether it's a plug-in hybrid. But we're not necessarily trying to get people from, you know, the lower MPG ICE to a higher MPG ICE. That's not ICE, internal combustion engine.
Why not?
I know, I
Yeah, I
kind
mean,
of
Why
do
wouldn't
see, I think we should, probably should.
I think that's, I think
because
that's.
technology
the
wise,
third
turning down the
pathway,
thermostat,
but just
not
make
enough.
it soft without a target.
It's too small. There's
Yeah,
only
but
so
it
many
might
Would the
hours
target
allowed.
just be
It might
federal
be
cafe
possible.
standards?
It may be small, but it's possible, whereas actually going to a hybrid
and
or
whatever
EV for a
motions
lot
we
of
need around
people is
that.
not gonna be possible right away.
I think the
Whereas
key
going
question
to
to
a
me
better-
would be, what action would the city be taking? I'm fully in agreement that, you know, if somebody can move from a 15 mph to a 25 mph, that's a good thing. But what, as a community, could we effectuate?
I think we have it in here. I think that's what action 2 is. EV education and buyer assistance being offered by Drive Electric Vermont. Maybe Drive Electric Vermont's not the only entity. There's other entities that can provide, you know, education about moving to a more, you know, fuel efficient vehicle. But I think that's what the city can do.
Okay, so the only question I was asking is, someone pointed out there's only 2 high-level pathways. I don't hear anyone saying.
It should
we
be
have a-
third. It should be third, it should be fuel efficiency, and the target should be federal cafe standards. And under it, the actions will be education, basically under the promotion category.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say those are the only categories, because we haven't gotten even past page 1 on this list.
I took the liberty of scrolling on my sheet and I don't see a
No.
third one.
That's,
I mean,
Well,
in my
there's-
mind, I think electric vehicle and fuel efficiency and then transportation demand management gets at the vehicle mile traveled reduction and, you know, other, you know, transit, bike ped. So to me, those are just some suggestions for 3 high-level pathways that we can add to the transportation
yeah, I
sector.
think alternate.
I think that's what
alternate
they are. I don't think
transportation
you're adding. I
is
think
a
That's under
big-
VMT.
That's a-
Right, but I take, yes, to me, that falls under 10% reduction of vehicle miles
Yeah.
traveled. It's all the
Oh.
ways that you do it,
Exactly.
because you're still gonna go somewhere.
Yeah,
I
Or
see.
you will work from home, like any of those things will reduce
Okay.
vehicle miles
right.
traveled.
Three
So
high level
it.
pathways.
A
EV
lot
is
of,
reduce VMT, increase fuel economy.
yes,
What's the public transit component? I've kind of forgot which, did we call out some public transit component here?
We did. I'm trying to find it on here, but we talked about making more investment in public transit.
We've never gone through this as a group.
No,
We didn't
No,
do
we
that.
haven't.
no, we gotta do that now.
Okay.
So I was just thinking that'll be part of the BMT, right? If somebody takes
Yeah,
public
see if I
transit
can-
versus driving.
So item 14 is invest in Green Mountain Transit, which from the headline that I didn't get a chance to read the article yet, they just cut a bunch of routes and drivers, so we have a great opening to what we want to put back.
well, that was because they didn't have the staffing. They didn't cut it for lack of ridership.
No, they did. This is a 30% reduction in ridership over the
Oh, really?
past few years, even after making it free.
No, but they also don't have the staffing.
But people don't wanna ride buses.
Well, you know, I think during the pandemic, it's kind of not a fair time
That's true
to,
too.
to really evaluate it,
That's true
because
too. Yeah.
I've
Yeah, no, I think
ridden,
that's
because I
part
rode
of
the
it.
bus for the first time ever
Hmm.
during the pandemic. You know, because I just said, who's gonna be riding the bus? You know, and it's free.
And sure enough, you're the only one.
No, I wasn't. And I was kind of glad I wasn't, but I had some conversations.
Megan
with-
Emery was on the bus.
Right,
I
exactly.
talked-
I will
People
say
you
that
never
I took the
normally
bus
talk
home
to
a couple weeks
on the
ago
bus.
and had to go to childcare, so it was 3:30 in the afternoon. There were 24 people on my bus.
All right.
Towards downtown. So, you know, and so it's some routes get a lot of people, some people get few, but it's not an insignificant transportation source.
And time of day probably matters too. So
Mhm.
it could be dialed in, I suppose. You know, looking at the increase.
But I'm sorry, can we start from the top? from one.
So the red in here, and
Is
can
the
you jump in
feedback.
here? I think that this represents where somebody had a comment of something that would be of
Right.
substance changed. This does not reflect whether lots of people said that it was a great idea, but I assume that unless somebody had a negative comment that they did like it. Is that an accurate?
These are the comments that we received. And they were placed on the actions where we thought they belonged. Some of them are new actions that didn't exist before. And then there's one action, number 25, where there's two different
Okay,
perspectives.
and
on
did
it.
anybody say I do or don't like an action generally that's not reflected in the red here?
Yeah.
Is that not the way people
Yeah.
provided feedback?
Action 25.
Right, but
isn't
I
it?
meant not in the red.
Oh, not in the red, no.
Okay, so my
didn't-
assumption
does
then
anybody
is that you were all good with the stuff that didn't have any red in it. As a way to sort of not spend an hour on each item.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Srini, you want
We
to
go to-
explain your comment?
Evaluate,
No, go ahead.
are we going to evaluate any of these as to whether they in fact are actionable or not? For,
Well, I guess that was my hope as to what feedback people would be providing in writing in advance. So I guess if somebody would like to call something out, please do so, but I would suggest, saying, does anybody have a comment before number 3? So that we're not spending an hour on each item if there aren't any comments.
Yeah, and the other thing from our work on the last sector that I think was helpful was framing this as, do we have enough information about each of these as we gather them, so that when we go through the next step of trying to refine or rank them or something like that, that we
Yeah.
feel like we all understand them
Yeah.
well enough, so.
See, the reason I provided more wordy comments is I think you have to pay attention to some of the nuances on how you go about stating something. So here, for example, develop a policy for existing multifamily properties to install electric vehicle charging equipment.
Elected vehicles.
Yeah, it's
Elected
electric
vehicle.
vehicle,
Which item
yeah.
are you on, Sri?
The
Three.
number
Three? Okay.
3.
Yep.
And I think here, yeah, it's a policy, but I think the next level of action is not even implementation. I'm just, the way I have worded here is to really identify the nature of the problem. That's what I was
this would
trying to get
apply,
to.
you're thinking about existing in, not new.
Existing current multifamily, yeah.
But he's
current multifamily.
saying, have a consultant
Not
identify
a resource, if whatever the appropriate resource is.
to inventory current multifamily electric vehicle charging network needs and capabilities. So that's,
And some consulting work has already been done and
Okay.
can be looked at.
Sure,
Drive
sure.
Electric Vermont, I think,
Sure.
has some of that information.
So, and then I also called out that the policy should include an incentive program for
Yeah,
rental owners,
that's
so that they will
important.
actually allocate a space.
That's important as an
You know,
incentive,
as
and
a,
so the
you
new
know,
format
As
works
a
better
promotion and,
to show that.
Otherwise rental owners are gonna say, why should I do it? Are you gonna pay me to do it?
Srini, would it be possible to say that whenever you're going to develop a policy, you're going to gather the kind of data that's in your first sentence? So you don't
You need to always
necessarily.
baseline.
Right.
Sure, baseline, yeah,
You need to
Yeah.
baseline.
maybe that, yeah.
So
I
that's
think
kind of.
So I
a
think
given,
you
that
can
first
just
line is a
assume
given.
that's part
Yeah.
of,
Yeah,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you don't need that first red sentence, you
Yeah.
know?
And my second comment, my related comment might be that I agree on the rental owners, but I think that an incentive program that also looks at ownership is also gonna be necessary.
sure.
Because we have lots of ownership condominiums in the city too, where it's not easy
Yeah.
in that front either.
Yeah.
So to me, it's incentives on all fronts, and it's
Yeah.
slightly different incentives
Yeah.
and different motivations, but they're all
Yeah.
incentives.
Yeah.
Well, do we want to break this out? I mean, similar to the conversations we've had around buildings, if there's different structures for, you know, condos, apartments, single
Guess
family rentals.
My
single
lesson
family
learned for the
owned,
last sector was that might be at the next stage of
Right.
implementation.
Okay.
Overall, the big picture statement is multifamily needs incentives and help getting there.
Yeah, so there's.
How
a-
it happens
But
sort
they
of
should probably
differs
just
by.
be added to this box and then it'll be flushed out in the new format, investment hyphen
Right.
incentives.
Exactly.
And that's really all you need.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I think just translating it into the new format
help.
will answer a lot
Yeah.
of those questions. But yeah, not duplicating things that are sort of next step.
Yeah,
So is this,
Makes sense.
so this is an investment action, not a.
It's both.
it's both, it's policy, investment,
Well, yeah. it's-
yeah, and I don't know where you capture incentive. Incentives is maybe part of promotion.
Investment.
Investment.
It's an
Investment,
investment.
okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Spend the money.
okay.
Anything where
Anything that
you're gonna have to
costs.
spend
Yeah,
money. is
you're right,
investment.
you're right.
So is the policy the stick part of this? Where the
Well, I think
investment is the
if
carrot?
we say that investment is anything that spends money, then everything's gonna be an investment.
Right, right.
Well, no, the
But-
city spends money.
Yeah, it's. when
Right,
Right,
the
but
city-
everything will be the
has to
city
spend.
spending money.
Well,
Every
not
single
really.
thing
The
in
city could
this.
just pass an ordinance and put the burden on.
That's cost money to do it. Like, all investments to do.
Okay.
I just mean like, I think we don't wanna parse them out so
No, I'm just saying,
much.
something that has to go into the budget.
Yeah, because sometimes it's the
Investment is something
investment
that has
of
to go into the
time.
budget.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, maybe the question is whether being specific that what we mean by investment is always incentive, or is it not always incentive?
To my mind, it has
Oh,
to go
it
through
could
the
be a
budget.
tax credit for something.
Well, that's an incentive, isn't it?
That's an
Sure.
investment for sure.
That can incentivize behavior.
I guess the things that aren't
But it
incentives
also
are
costs the city money. It also
yeah, it
costs the
costs,
money
yeah, of
city
course,
to have a
isn't it?
tax credit. Of course.
Well, it's cost everyone, but I think there can be an investment in a concrete, like a charging station. That the city opts to say, okay, we're gonna invest in, I don't know, 25 sprinkled around the city. And we pay for it and it's done. Versus an incentive.
Right.
Or some kind of policy that you work with a homeowners association to figure out,
Right,
How
and they're
can
all
you
sort of a little bit of both. because-
generate,
right,
yeah.
Because in order for the council to decide, we're gonna allocate the money to do this, there's a policy of this is important.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't wanna sort of repeat, so,
yeah,
you know, I guess I'd say maybe, you
yeah.
know, let's let a smaller group or, you
Yeah.
know, have Melanie and help to figure out which goes under which, because fundamentally it's the same thing.
See, to me, policy is putting a stake in the ground and saying that we're gonna address this. And then you've kind of figure out, you know, what does it take? You know, if you don't put a stake in the ground, then, you know, nothing is gonna happen,
So
so,
in that definition, we're creating the policy now, so by definition, they'll all have policy, right?
yeah.
They do, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
they, pretty much, all have policy. The only ones that wouldn't be is where policy already exists at the state level. You know, that you don't have to create it.
Yeah.
You just have to, and that's where promotion becomes really important. Because just because something exists doesn't mean it,
Yeah.
that people utilize it. And that's a lot of the weatherization programs right
Yeah.
now. These programs have been around for a while, but
So,
not as many people utilize them. So it needs a lot of
so
promotion.
so the next one, I got a direct feedback from a GMP employee who lives across the street from me. And he said, you have to, if you want electric vehicle adoption, you have to ask people to put the right electricity supply, which is a level 2 charger, which is a upgrade for your circuit breaker. If you don't have it, you have to spend $800 to upgrade your circuit breaker to do that. So he said, you know, for new buildings, we have to make sure that they have the capability. There's a difference between level 1 and level 2. Pardon me?
200 amp service and level 2
See, this
chargers.
is
Yeah,
already in
yeah.
the net,
That
this
is
will
it.
be in the net zero
Srini.
building code.
That's actually an energy code issue. And just so people know, starting next week, the Department of Public Service and their consultant are going through the next 3-year iteration of energy codes. And just so you know that there is a certain number of charging stations.
I think-
And they define what kind of
Okay,
charging station.
let's
they
make
are.
sure that it's
But
just
it's not in
level 1.
residential. This is in commercial buildings I don't think in the residential.
It's in multifamily.
It's in
residential,
multifamily,
and
it's
a-
not in
it's a
single
low
family.
No, he's-
percentage
yeah.
Of the parking.
I think
Yeah,
the-
it's a
I
low
think-
percentage.
I think the feedback I got was you have to address wherever there is a single family
Yeah,
or a duplex, you have to put level 2 charging capability.
yeah.
That will really help.
Two quick comments from
Make sure
my
that
end here. I
comes up
think
in the
maybe
code.
adjusting the wording slightly to be charging infrastructure, whatever it is. It may not be the actual level
Yeah.
2 charger, it's the service
Yeah.
of,
It's
that
the
you
circuit
do.
you need.
The 220.
Well, you could just say with appropriate
200 amp.
vehicle charging.
200, yeah.
No, no, it's the 200 amp is the service to the
200
house.
amp is a service
200
to
is
the
service
Yeah,
to
house.
the
I
house.
mean, in the
And then
garage or
in
wherever it
the,
is.
where-
in
Right,
the
but if you-
panel, you need at least a 50 amp breaker to support level 2.
But for
That,
what,
that's really all it is, just
Just
it's
a
just
50 amp
replacing the
breaker.
20 with a 50 amp breaker.
but I think Srini's point and
Long as
thinking
you
about
still
what the
have
concern
enough
was for folks who've done this
slots.
is the $800 charge is if you build a house with a 100 or 150 amp panel in it, and then you try to
Exactly.
put heat pumps in it, and charger
You
in,
need a 200 amp panel.
then you have to have someone come out, rip it all out,
Absolutely.
it's 2 days.
That's
before
not, it's a
addition to
different
my
point
house.
than the level 2 charger, so you need to build a house with a 200
Yeah,
amp
they're good.
panel.
With a
And then,
50 amp
and
breaker,
then and
so-
you need a 50 amp breaker
but
to
that's-
support a
that's-
level 2 charger.
That just go to Lowe's.
You're gonna need to
Pop it in.
increase the size of your service, even if you install heat pumps and.
So my second question,
It should be standard,
Srini,
right?
is
Nobody does anything.
I speak from experience.
on the residential side, that makes
Yeah, new homes.
Yes, but then I didn't have to do.
on the residential side, that makes a lot of sense. My question is, I'm not sure that I'm versed enough. Most of the charging that people will do will be at home. Does it need to be our objective that all employees have access to charging? Because that's think of, if you've got 200 parking spaces for 200 employees, is the objective that there be 200
No.
charging there? Because
Level-
that's
No, the-
feels redundant to,
the
you
level-
need some.
I actually, I mean, there's a lot of, the solar is, soaking up solar during the day is the challenge that the grid is gonna have 10 years from now. And all of this push toward everyone charging at night is solving the problem of an old coal-fired grid. And so, I mean, I know that everyone wants to have charging at home because there's no reliable charging infrastructure out in the world right now. So everyone who buys an EV has to put one at home, right?
Yeah.
But this is a circular problem we have today. I think if shopping and work had chargers, that's what the grid really needs is it's two things, right? One is soaking up solar, and two is we need to have 5,000 cars in South Burlington connected to the grid so that when we need to pull the power out of them to support the grid, they're all connected.
Yeah.
So that's fair, I guess, from a city strategy thing. I guess I would like to, we're starting to get to where we're gonna go to policy. Is the recommendation gonna be that, if you have 200 employees, you should have 200
No,
charging?
no,
That's a
no.
big,
Maybe
big
50.
push.
These things charge
No.
less than an hour. The level 2 charges, charge time is much less. So all I'm saying is, Ethan is exactly right. You have to think about how you're gonna help the utility company manage the, power consumption. If everybody starts up electric heat pump in the evening and everybody charges their electric vehicle, it's a disproportional load that is gonna be very, very hard to figure out. By having these everywhere, you have the access to get solar. Whatever solar is coming, it's going directly to the charger.
We're not gonna solve that load
Yeah.
problem
Heat
in
pumps
South
run
Burlington.
all the time.
True.
I mean, we're just
They
not gonna
never
solve
turn
that.
on.
You have to
And
solve it,
honestly,
you have to solve it everywhere.
the utility has to
grid-
solve that, right? Because there's gonna be also plenty of days where there is no solar.
Heat pumps
So they're gonna have to
always
solve that balancing problem at a regional level with
run when
sufficient
the
battery
temperatures go
storage
down, but they
or,
also
you know,
keep
hydro
off-
It
storage.
needs to be solved everywhere, all the way down to the feeder level. I'm working for a utility right now.
But it
It has
can't
to
be,
get solved
Ethan, that
in
we
this.
have to suggest putting charges everywhere when we don't know what the solution to that problem is gonna be.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, the research that Drive Electric Vermont has done is that, people are both charging at home and at work, and depending upon the range of the battery. Granted, the people working here may be coming from South Burlington, but they need a place to charge in order to return
Yeah.
If they do, I mean, isn't really what we need to solve for, and we talked about this one of the first meetings, folks that can't charge at home.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a garage, and they don't have a space, that we need charging
That's
for.
the,
But if we can get to a
critical.
point where everyone can charge either at home or somewhere else in the next, in the lifetime of this plan,
Yeah,
that's a pretty good target.
I'm definitely not saying
And
we
the
should have
state
200
is
chargers.
putting
for
in
200
tons of chargers,
Yeah,
all along the interstate and every place
Yeah,
else.
the
They're
state's mostly
really
dealing with-
committed to do
yeah.
that.
Level 3 for tourism, right?
Anybody can charge at home, it's just it takes 24 hours to get their car charged up.
Yeah,
Right.
No, but some people may not have a spot.
yeah, they don't
Well,
have a
what?
spot. They
Some
don't, they
people may
don't
not
have.
have a spot.
Hey, look, my daughter has a place out in the sticks farm. I run a long line to my car.
I could say the condo that I previously lived in, there would be no way
Yeah.
to charge a car. There's one outlet in the entire carport, and if I tried to plug it in, I would probably short the whole thing.
Can I-
So there is an issue.
That treetops, and Pia was telling me, she says, there's no way at treetops to plug in a TV.
Can I suggest something here? On these charging type policy stuff, can we actually park the policy for now and talk to somebody from GMP and just give some thought to how these should be structured instead of us trying to solve it?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly get down to the details. I think
Yeah.
the point that we're all getting to is that if we don't have a strategy to make sure that there's enough chargers, we
Yeah.
can't expect that we're gonna have enough EVs.
Yeah.
Right.
I would also say this can also go to the implementation plan. If we're
Sure.
broad enough to say that the main message here is we need enough EV chargers for a move to electric vehicles to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And then
that's,
the storage thing, I mean, we are gonna have a renewable energy sector. And we could think about storage, right? And, in that sector. Because that's really what it comes down to. How do you store the energy when you need it?
it is storage, but the cars have 5 times as much storage as a
I know.
Powerwall, right?
I know,
Um,
but that's where it naturally comes up, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that the simple message I would have with chargers, we want to have chargers for more EVs than we have today, so we need to be proactive on that. So if we can get that in there, that's great.
Moving to the next one.
Two might move along together as more and more cars get bought,
Yeah,
more and more charging. I mean, I don't think you need to
yeah.
charge the world waiting for the cars to be purchased.
So,
Well,
And the building code will
I
take
think
care
it'll
of
work.
all of it.
so, Donna, are you commenting on number 5 or is that, you're all set? Number 5, it says, from Donna, add the above text, are you okay? Is that?
Well, it's just dealing with commercial properties. I think the other ones we were talking about
Okay.
residential properties.
Okay. Number 6, I actually took this from 2 other big cities. So this is the way they are providing EV vehicle access to economically challenged people.
Yeah, yeah.
Car Share
that's-
Vermont already offers EV.
Which one?
Car Share Vermont.
Oh, yeah, okay.
it is
Well,
a-
yes,
Yeah.
but they don't have any places in South Burlington yet.
No,
So to me, this message is
yeah,
help
Yes,
work with Car Share Vermont to expand into South Burlington.
yeah,
EV all the better, but just being here will be great.
yeah,
Right,
okay.
good point.
Let's see, 7, 7.
This is municipal vehicles
Yeah.
and equipment.
So this is just, again, the comment I made is purely from an implementation perspective, I think, consider joint investment on shared EV assets. There are equipment that are not 100% utilized all the time. I don't see any reason why a specific type of heavy equipment cannot be shared as a common asset
Between towns or between departments?
between towns, between departments. You don't have to have dedicated vehicle for everything in one town, so. I mean, these are just some ideas. I don't know, maybe it belongs in the implementation.
yeah,
part of
Public
the-
Works would have a lot to say
Yeah,
about
yeah.
not having their own vehicles.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think.
Well, we have plans or agreements with like the town of Shelburne.
Well, and
So-
we don't have a
We
grader.
have
because we have
the,
one dirt road, so we work with Williston on to grade our one dirt road,
right.
Yeah.
So
as
I-
a for instance.
I
Yeah,
think this is an opportunity
yeah,
to partner on some of the equipment that is not
Yeah.
used, it's parked most of the
Yeah,
time.
it's parked most of the time.
yeah.
And
Or a
the
good portion of them.
conservation
Yeah,
group of towns
yeah,
could also do that, couldn't they?
yeah.
You know, South Burlington, Shelburne,
Conservation.
Oh, the land conservation?
yeah.
Yeah, but I think our road department does try to do that. Can they do more? Absolutely, and this would be a great place to partner with other communities.
I think the other place where we can do it, that we already do, but moving the specific comment here is EV, is we are eligible in a variety of areas to purchase through the state pool
Okay,
at a discounted rate for the things that everybody buys.
I
Yeah.
see.
Pickup trucks, police
Okay.
cars, et cetera. If the state pool were to move towards having an EV thing at their level, then we get that price. So helping to sort of advocate through this,
Yeah,
that, you know, if the state can move to that, then we can do
Yeah.
it way easier because, you know,
Yeah.
we're buying hundreds of these things, not twos of these things.
That would be a good policy statement.
So
Can I ask just generally in terms of the purchase decisions that, and how they're made in the city? It seems like the date for switching to EV keeps receding in terms of police vehicles and some other vehicles, right? We have one like move a human around the city that's a plug-in hybrid or something, right? Like that's as far as we've gotten now in 2022. What can either of you help us understand like what the barriers are and how we should be helping to remove those so that the city vehicle, I mean, it seems to me that with the schedule that we're on right now, if at all possible, we shouldn't buy any more fossil fuel vehicles starting today.
that's something be happy to look into. I'm not intimately familiar with it. I can say that broadly speaking, our departments are looking at it. And the question, you know, becomes, you know, is the technology proven enough to be that vehicle that is used in a way, you know, in an everyday use kind of way. As a small, for instance of this, I guess a year and a half ago or so, we got a demo of the best electric rider mower out there. The best electric rider mower out there goes about 1/3 the speed of our gas ones. And so in order to do our ball fields, it would be 3 times the staffing to accomplish the same mission. It has specialty uses that might be really good, but for the, you know, we're doing baseball diamonds and football diamonds, the technology isn't there in a realistic way for the city. But it is there for leaf blowers. So, you know, do we pivot and say, let's move the leaf blowers in the next few years because frankly, we just can't triple our staff for mowing until the technology is there. I think that's one example that I am familiar of, but I'd be happy to do some more work on other ones.
That's what we've heard too, Ethan, from other public works directors, is for the large vehicles. The feeling is that the technology is not quite there yet. For you know, smaller vehicles, light duty vehicles, it is. So police cruisers
Tesla
would
police
be-
cars look pretty good, yeah.
Police cruisers would be a great place to focus,
Yep.
but you know, bigger dump trucks, that kind of thing, you know, maybe not.
And pickup trucks are pretty close, right? Lightning.
Not quite yet.
Well, what
I
about,
still have my deposit in and there's nothing on offer yet. Getting there.
well, then there's biodiesel too, and that, I don't think that's something we've even written down. And, you know, for large diesel powered vehicles, that's probably gonna be the only option out there for quite a long time. So that one, I don't think we actually,
And there is some biodiesel now that can be used in the current vehicles that exist. That's available. It's a certain type of fuel. I couldn't remember the name of it, but Vermont Clean Cities Coalition is the place to find all this information. They're an excellent resource, and that's why we've added that.
Do you know,
to the list.
I'm sorry. I've just heard some criticisms of biodiesel that there's more fossil fuel input to grow the corn than it would take to just burn the oil.
I'm not the expert for sure.
It'd be good to find out whether that's actually a
There's different kinds, right? There's like cooking oil.
Right, waste oil is pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, and I think Matt Coda's the expert on this, so he's on our city council. I'm sure he'd be really happy to educate you about that. And apparently it is something it's not a crop that's being grown exclusively for fuel. It's grown for something else, and the fuel is a byproduct of it. And so that's the stuff that's supposedly good.
Versus the ethanol, yep. So my only other comment on number 7 here is that it might ultimately belong better under the municipal operations than under transportation. Because I think when we look at municipal operations as a whole, and we say the reason in years 1 through 6 that we can't do the heavy vehicles is the technology doesn't exist. So instead, let's go full bore on small equipment where it does exist. And investment policies and other municipal things sort of to the science-based targets. If we can't hit it in this part of it, we've got to try to hit it in another part.
Yeah, I like that. I like that you have much better resources to focus on it and articulate it better, I think. Yeah, I like that. Number 10 again is to have a specific focus on school district on the buses, but again, Paul, I mean, just to add to your comment, you know, if this is a city-based initiative, municipal initiative, you know, I looked up some references based on Massachusetts. The current price tag for a working EV bus is $200,000. Diesel is about $120,000. So it's a pretty significant, jump in capital investment. And some New England towns are beginning to adopt. I don't know which, either any Vermont town has adopted.
So Burlington School District is working with a vendor
Okay,
that they have 2 buses that are on order. I don't know if they've received them yet or
Okay.
not, but they're working with this vendor that does everything for them,
I see.
including the financing. So the district only needs to pay an annual fee. So that process is starting.
okay.
Which is this, did you say?
South Burlington School District.
I think one of the electric buses has arrived. I think that's what the,
So
I can follow up on that.
excited.
But they are working on that.
Okay,
Yeah, they've had supply chain issues. They were hoping to have both buses at the beginning of the year and they didn't.
okay.
A promotion item under this one would be doing something to make it cool to ride school buses, because apparently a lot of kids don't ride school buses and their parents drive them to school every day. And I think we need something that addresses that, even if it's directing the school district to come up with a policy that's going to have X savings. Because I don't think you can impose anything on the schools because they don't like that. But if
It's not our
you,
purview.
yeah, it's not our purview either. So just kind of saying that, we're asking for, this percentage of savings, including like all of the transportation for the schools, because it breaks down into, students driving, teachers driving, and staff, and the school buses. And I'm sure there's other ones, transportation for away games and all that stuff. So I think it would be fair enough to have, as one of the promotions. Well, no, I guess that's more of a policy that the school district, has to do their share. Whatever
I think it would
that-
have to be
whatever that
promotion because they are a completely separate, and they are a
Right,
public
they
entity
can't-
responsible to the same voters, but we have no authority over
So it's
them.
promoting them to create a policy.
Right.
Yeah, okay, that sounds right. So that's an important one because it's, and we've kind of figured that out
Yeah.
before, that it's hard to.
So is that a separate action or does that fall under developing a roadmap? Or is it?
I would put it
It's
under
government.
this one as
Yeah.
promotion, but I would say it's not just about EV buses. I would say
Right.
it's about
Oh,
EV
yeah.
buses and actions to reduce
Yeah.
Private
to put
vehicle.
private vehicle drop off,
Private
which might mean walking to school.
Yeah, it
It's
can
not
be,
necessarily about buses.
it could be a lot of different ways.
So we're talking
That's a
about like behavior
VMT,
change.
right?
It's on VMT.
That's
That's
true.
if that's
That's
a
true.
VMT
That's-
one,
You're right, you're
it should
right.
be a
But
second
yeah,
one.
Yep.
That's true.
What is
VMT.
next?
Vehicle miles traveled.
We're talking about.
It is, but when it's specific to the school, I think it is a separate one when it deals with the schools, because,
It could be, but VMT is a whole second
Oh,
category,
right.
right? There's EVs and VMTs are two big categories.
well, okay,
Yes.
yeah, that's true. All vehicles. all
Number,
vehicles.
I think number 11 is a good one.
Yeah,
know.
and this one got, it was reduced down a little bit, edited down a little bit to, its core, which I think is good.
Yeah,
That basically there's a couple of issues, in my neighborhood, there's trash pickups by 2 haulers on Monday. There's one hauler that comes on Wednesday, one hauler that comes on Thursday, and they come every week.
Wow.
And, it's like, okay, maybe we don't want to just have one hauler do the whole city, but at least make it so that you only have
2
one
days of
hauler
pickup.
per neighborhood and 1 day a week.
So I think it's fantastic. I might suggest that this might live under the vehicle miles traveled,
Okay.
not EV, because it's about efficiency.
Yeah,
of
this
routes.
isn't an EV one, right?
And
I don't think they.
we
made
have
that
worked
up.
It's not EV.
we have worked with Burlington and done a joint first study on it. There's action to be done, and I know
Okay.
Councillor Chittenden especially is very
He is
interested in this
interested.
subject.
No,
So,
I think the
Queen City
entire
Park.
council agrees.
yeah, no, I just know that he specifically
this
has
is
been.
his little baby.
this is the kind of action I think you will get traction with the community because it's a lead by example. You can't just ask people to go and buy EVs and do other things and still continue to support.
This was a
practice.
no-brainer.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer,
It's a
yeah,
no-brainer you
yeah,
can get done.
Park,
yeah.
Queen City Park has done this
Well,
on
until
our
someone
own.
says you can't use Casella, you gotta use the red can people. And it's like, I've always used Casella. I like Casella. I don't wanna use the red can.
Queen City Park did this organically because we have small streets, I think is why it started. It started long before I got there. And there's one trash hauler. I think there's one holdout on the propane side.
I was gonna say that it worked really well in the neighborhood. The neighborhood selected one trash hauler. And I also heard from one person who said, and I was able to go to the competitor and get them to undercut it, so I use a different one, which is, frustrating, but that's where a policy and requirement from the city
Yeah,
becomes big and
Yeah, right.
not necessarily universally loved, because somebody
Exactly.
will always say, I could have gotten $5 a month cheaper than this system, and that's,
Exactly.
so it'll be loved by people who don't like 6 a.m. wake ups, it'll be not loved by every resident.
yeah.
I mean, I assume there's an RFP.
Well, I think they work, one of the plans was to really have all the haulers agree
Yeah,
that we'll do,
Right,
this section of town. and you-
exactly.
That section, and-
But there needs to be a
Yeah.
competitor.
but it was
yeah.
challenging to get.
This is
them
the kind of stuff, it's much easier to implement in a big city. Because in big city, you can't just have all these 4 or 5 different options running around.
They
Because
don't
it's a
get
traffic
choices.
issue.
That's
Yeah,
right.
you know,
You either work with the mob or you
Yeah.
don't, right?
yeah,
In a big city, the city runs it.
yeah. I'm just, yeah, yeah.
It's the solution.
So I think that was the end of the EV sector.
Okay, oh, wow,
Did
we made progress.
anybody feel that something was dramatically missing for this very first round?
So the only thing I didn't see is anything about the dealerships. And I know from
Do we
talking,
have any control over that?
well, the same amount of control that we have over the residents and the other businesses, right? It's not, it's promotion or incentives, it's not policy, right?
Well, isn't that what drive electric motors?
Well, they do all this stuff.
Yeah. So why would South Burlington need to do that?
Could
In-
you
in a
speak to
special
all of
way.
us, because I can't hear a single word you say. What about
So,
dealerships?
so the concern that I've heard from folks, and I've experienced a little bit of this shopping for cars, is that the dealerships don't always have enough education. They don't necessarily have inventory in, right? Like the Kia dealership, I think, had a problem that they didn't think it was worth paying all the money to the mothership to get the electric vehicles in, so they're just not gonna carry them in Vermont. And then I think there's some concern that the dealerships maybe don't make as much money on service from electric vehicles, so they're not as interested in pushing them. And so I've heard a number of stories from folks that they go to the dealerships and they're like, I heard I should get an EV. And they go to the dealership and they walk away and they're like, oh, the dealer talked me out of getting an EV. right? And so, again, like, yeah, I don't think we can pass a law telling dealers that they gotta sell something, but if this is an obstacle right now, then it should be on our radar,
Service is a
particularly
big
given
issue. That's a
South,
big issue.
South Burlington has more than its
They don't
fair
make any
share of
money on
auto
EVs.
A lot of
uses.
car dealerships.
That's right, that's where they make their money.
They don't make any money on
Service.
EVs.
No,
That's a big
that's
problem.
right.
Service, lots
The
of service
electricians deal
revenue
with
is
it.
definitely
They
big
still,
issue.
they still put in
Yeah,
a lot of
but the
LEDs.
dealers-
So Ethan, do you think it's an additional action or enhancing action two to include
Hybrids don't belong.
dealerships?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the action is, but I think, in the same way that we sort of kick some of the stuff down to implementation to figure out exactly how we solve the problem, just to flag and say,
Yeah,
work with
Yeah.
dealers, figure out why,
yeah.
the availability of EVs is less than.
Well, and consumer demand will eventually drive it,
Yeah, right now
no
it's
pun intended, but.
behind consumer
I mean,
demand, right?
I,
So,
I
yeah.
would be hard pressed to adopt a policy by the city of South Burlington that tells the car dealerships how to train their personnel and to make sure that they're
So,
even-handed when they're promoting one kind of vehicle over another.
well, we
I
didn't
don't
shy
know how
away
you
from,
get there.
but we didn't shy away from promoting heat pumps, and it's the same exact challenge that we have with heat pumps right now, is that HVAC dealers are not enthusiastic about that. We identified that as an area where we need to figure out how to help the HVAC dealers transition to heat pumps. But it's also their business, right? We can't force them to it, but we wanna influence this.
So
Right.
I guess the question that I would pose is this a potential South Burlington thing because we happen to have a lot of car dealerships? Like, for example, if we were the city of Winooski where there are no car dealerships, would this
Yeah.
be something on our radar
You know,
to do regardless? Or is it because we happen to be home to them? Because to me, that sort of shapes the conversation
But
about
the
what
city
we're trying to achieve.
could sponsor a car dealership EV day. Where you announce, on June 30th, all the car dealers are gonna show up their EVs, right? And go to the dealers and say, look, we're gonna do this and you're gonna have EVs on your lot, right?
yeah.
It's kind of like.
Well,
I wonder
you do that, but you're also
similar.
not saying you gotta train your
Right,
personnel.
but they could be kind of this kind of,
See, this is where I think maybe SPBA can play a role.
Are all the car dealership people members?
Yeah.
That would be helpful then.
Yeah, SPBA can play a role. They have a quorum, they have all the people, they understand what the city is working on. There seems to be an interface between SPBA and city. Instead of us trying to figure out a specific policy, we promote, push it through SPBA.
What's the acronym?
The South Burlington Business
Association.
Association,
SBBA.
SBBA.
I mean, a potential action could be city staff to, do an educational
Yeah,
promotion event to SBBA and,
yeah.
and the dealerships are there, then great, but also, Drive Electric Vermont is, enhancing their training and the work that they do with the dealerships, in South Burlington to ensure that they
Yeah.
are, saying the right things and encouraging people to drive electric. So I think
So my suggestion would be, in order to make sure that we're keeping all of our actions at a similar level and we don't wind up going down this path of, let's host an event once a year to blank, 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 because that's way too specific. To have something that either incorporates one of the other ones or calls out on its own, that we recognize that the dealers are a player, just like Drive Electric Vermont is a player, and have them be part of the solution. And I think maybe we leave it at that, because
It's a great idea.
how that happens is so
Yes,
much more
just add
specifically
them to
detailed.
one of these others.
okay,
That's good.
And recognize, we can even recognize that we are home to a disproportionately large number of car dealerships as why this is something that we're thinking about that Winooski might not be. So. Those are home runs.
Okay, so we're all good with 12, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, under microtransit, are we talking bike share, car share?
Which number are you speaking about?
12.
Well, Yeah, because I've seen it defined different ways. I mean, some people include, all bicycling, bicycle commuting and that, but I'm like, how do you define
No,
microtransit?
isn't that like
City
city
buses.
hosted Lyft or Uber?
That's
right?
what I
Is that what
thought.
that is?
That's what I thought it
Yeah.
meant.
I know Megan was talking about when she came back from
Yeah.
France, there was these little micro buses
Exactly,
or something that she
Yeah.
thought were really cool.
Yeah, so I think that there's, my knowledge of microtransit is limited, but I think there's many different ways that this can be done and, within the scope of this project. Researching the different ways that can be done is challenging, so, that's why we wrote the statement this way. Cause it's hard to know at this point what's gonna
Sure.
work for South Burlington.
Yeah,
Yeah, you just
Um,
might want to define what it is in there because, I got a little confused because I was reading Montgomery counties and they included a lot of things under microtransit
yeah,
that, that we probably have in other places here.
yeah.
It isn't clear that there's, unless it's electric, it isn't clear that it's, saving fossil fuel.
Yeah,
But the goal here is reducing vehicle miles traveled.
Yeah, this is,
So if you're getting more than one person in that microtransit, then you are helping with that objective.
Yeah.
Well, unless they would have walked, or unless in the absence of a micro transit system, they would have lived closer to where they work, or unless, I mean, there's a lot of variables.
Yeah, I mean, typically the argument
If you
is,
took a big bus rather than.
There's a lot of
little-
variables.
if
You don't know what you're incenting, right?
if you shift people from owning a car where the marginal cost of each trip is negligible to paying for each trip, then they think differently about how they plan trips.
yeah,
That's the general philosophy of shifting this stuff, even if you're in the next step, getting them to be the fourth person on a full-size city bus that is not actually more efficient than driving a car. If you just were to make the decision that day, it's a shift of structure.
And I thought the microtransit sort of makes more sense from what I was observing one day here in the senior center, when there's senior center activities, it just kind of is a little bit scary that some of these people who could barely bend over are driving here individually. That is to me very frightening. And
That's not a
really,
climate change thing.
but it just seems like there's a ready audience for some microtransit here, to get
Essex
to
has
those
a good-
programs.
Essex has a good senior van system, so that could be part of. the
Yeah, like a
action is
senior van
researching that.
system, yeah.
Yeah.
Because,
SSTA is someone else to talk to.
support telecommuting facility from government employees,
Buy all laptops.
Actually, number 13, could South Burlington have not a policy, a promotion or a vision for saying that, I read a statistic that there are roughly 20,000 jobs, if I remember right, in South Burlington,
A little more than that's 2023 or something.
23 years.
Yeah.
75% of them are serviced by people who are living outside South Burlington, is that right?
Probably more.
yes.
I think that was in your initial presentation in
Yeah,
January.
it's
Yeah.
in the existing conditions presentation, and I
Okay.
apologize, I
So we
don't
need-
know what the number is, but there's
Yeah.
a significant amount
Yeah,
of people
so
coming
I
into
just
work.
wonder, I mean, it may not affect the specific VMT of South Burlington from an accounting perspective. I just wonder, I don't know whether any other city in the Chittenden County has got the same type of, movement. I just wonder whether South Burlington could do something more to promote telecommuting.
Yeah, so I think that is in here, it's the next one, partner with CATMA to increase membership among employers to reduce driving alone, so CATMA is
Okay.
an organization that trains employers
I
on
see.
what they
Okay.
can do
Okay,
from a human resource perspective to reduce
Okay.
VMT, encourage
Okay.
people
Right,
to
so they
take
have-
transit, carpooling.
okay, that's a good one.
And telecommuting.
COVID
telecommuting,
has probably been
yeah.
the best PR campaign for telecommuting that we could have
Yeah.
ever not asked for.
Right.
Yeah,
But the missing piece that came to my mind when you were talking about that is that we should support rural broadband initiatives in Vermont.
oh.
absolutely,
Right.
yeah, that's probably one of the biggest greenhouse gas reduction measures you could possibly do here.
Okay, do you know?
It's, I don't wanna go on a side tangent. That, like everything else that Andrew was just describing with microtransit, is also a double-edged sword, because the more people can live further afield and have their full technology, they may choose to live in Pomfret.
Right.
And so you might get more population growth in very, very rural areas because they can have all the access they ever needed. So it cuts both ways with all these things.
It's a negative for the working landscape in that respect.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, but fortunately, you have an older population, so as you shift to that, they die and their houses are available in small communities.
You gotta knock them down quick before they get sold.
That's
Yeah,
what cheap
well.
housing is. In the small towns, you can't
It
get
isn't
anywhere from
just
there.
that people will build new houses in Pomfret. There likely are more availability.
Under number 14, I like what you've added, Donna. I would also keep in there, or add in there generally areas too, like the city center area can be, it doesn't have to, it can be a whole bunch of small employers that sort of together become a
Right.
member. So it doesn't
Okay.
have to be just large employers. You know, we
Yeah,
can work
I-
with the Blue Mall, for instance, and they're all, and sort of on behalf of all their tenants, how do they solve it? So that would be my only thing in the cat and the thing is like, it may be a geographic thing as well as a large employer thing.
Well, it's definitely a geographic thing because our buses don't serve all parts of South Burlington.
Yeah.
For
Okay,
sure.
let's keep going.
16. 15, 17,
I think the free ridership, at least it's here for another year, I think. I think the
I
state.
saw they were gonna change it in June. That's what, there was an article
Yeah, but I think
yesterday.
they're gonna use ARPA money to support
Yeah.
Right.
Vermont Transit free.
Another year?
Yeah, for another year, but that's not forever.
So I'm just curious. So for example, if you want to go from Southeast Quadrant to Burlington City, is there a bus service that's available? Or do you have to come here and then go?
From the southeast quadrant, the only bus service that exists is 2 times in the morning and 2 times in the evening on Heinsberg Road. There's a bus that comes from Heinsberg down Kennedy Drive and then into Burlington.
Oh.
Otherwise, that's the only service in the
Really?
southeast quadrant.
Yeah.
Right, and they do a pickup at,
And that's, that's a factor of density, frankly.
I see.
It's not viable for the transit services to be going up and down Spear Street
I
at
see.
this time.
Probably an estimate of how many people don't own cars who are living in those parts of the city where it's like a vicious cycle, right?
No, I
There's
mean,
no
I was
buses,
just
no
thinking
homes
that
anywhere
like, for
far.
example, like from Overlook Park. Overlook Park is a spot with a lot of parking spots, a reasonable amount of parking spots. If there was a pickup service for bus, do you think people would take it to
I
Burlington?
think
I don't
the
think so.
challenge is that
Yeah.
for transit to be even sort of
Gotta be
remotely
regular.
viable, you've got to be somewhere near 8 dwelling units an acre.
I see.
And we're at like less than 1 in most of the southeast quadrant. So you could have an on-demand service, which would be microtransit that you
see.
could potentially address. But for something that goes by every hour, it's either going to be so rare that it's not convenient to the person who needs it,
Yeah.
or it's so frequent and it winds up being empty.
I see.
Which is-
I was just thinking
Which is
like a
actually-
morning, evening type, morning.
It's not gonna be
evening type
frequent
setup.
enough. People aren't gonna
I
use it.
see, I see.
However, we have seen success on some of the more
Okay,
popular routes, like several years ago, the Williston Road that goes to the U-Mall moved from 30-minute service to 15-minute service.
yeah,
And it went up because once you hit 15-minute service, you've reached the point where somebody can assume that there'll be a bus in a reasonably short period of time and they don't have to sort of have this anxiety of like, I'm never gonna get to work. What if I'm late? My boss is gonna be mad. At 15 minutes, you begin to be I can just walk to the bus stop. We're not there to, 6 minute, which is what you really need, but that's really sort of big cities.
I mean, we're missing, I think, actually the biggest thing that moves people away from single car ownership, which is make parking
Yes,
awful.
right.
when I moved from a work environment where there was no free parking and just no parking available, I don't care how bad it was, I biked, because otherwise I'm driving around for 15 minutes, and we moved down the road and there was tons of parking, and all of a sudden I got really lazy about the bike because
Somewhere
It's
that
number
is,
23, yeah.
that's number 23. If you want to bolster that, you're right. I mean, inconvenience is the thing that drives people to make changes,
Or
just like in the
cost.
building side
Yeah.
sector.
I mean, UVM charges a lot, and
Right.
so,
Yeah, and if parking costs $20 a day.
Well, Burlington seems to be doing its part, making parking less available.
But it's easier now because you can like remote re-up your, but it is expensive. Yeah.
Could we look at number 22?
Just so that we're staying and then what we're doing
Oh,
today,
did
do
I
you have anything
skip too
before
much? Sorry.
22?
No, that's all right.
Which one? 20,
Okay, so where are we now?
Foster bicycle, is that 22 is Foster bicycle service?
Do we want to do that?
Which one?
22?
I can't see the
I
numbers
can't
up
see
there.
either.
It's Foster.
Basic services to exist within a half mile of neighborhoods.
So
Yeah.
am I understanding correctly, that's mixed use zoning?
Yeah, so this was, so I put this one in.
Is that-
This was sort of recognizing that the role of the planning commission would be to develop the city's land use plan.
Right.
What can the climate action committee do, task force do to give some support and guidance without rewriting an entire land use plan? So a suggestion that I put in here was one way to reduce vehicle mile travels is to have your basic services be within a time that you can walk or bike to it, like, a grocery store and thing, or a convenience store, that kind of thing.
Right.
Entirely up for your discussion. So,
Like the way neighborhoods used to be.
and right, the Chamberlain neighborhood that has the airport deli.
I love that
As a
the
small
side of it was
example.
right around the corner,
I do too.
right?
Yeah.
It just
There's a
saves so
little
much.
quick cider, you know,
Right, milk and eggs.
and
Yeah.
it, I mean, when you're just desperate and you
It
go and
saves
you
a
say,
lot
oh
of
my
time
God,
and
I'm
VMT for
totally out
sure."
of whatever. Or my grandchildren are coming and I have no milk.
Yeah, and I mean, Bike and Ted Committee is really aware when these developments are going in to make sure that there are off-road paths so that people feel safe.
Yeah,
walking
there's
and
not a good path
walking
to
in.
Cyber Mill.
There will be.
There will be.
Is this a
Yay, I'm
PPP
waiting
thing though?
for it.
Like any large
It's in-
development?
It's in the works.
Makes sense too, have a grocery store.
Yes, for sure. And also, as we think about, I have to think about the neighborhood, but, let's say our if there was a market demand for it, our regulations would not allow anything to be near country club estates today, period. There is no large development to come in the future, but our zoning precludes there from ever being a store that would serve that area, so the backside of the airport. As a, for example, so it may not always be large development. If somebody came into us today and said, I think I could make a convenience store work back there, we'd have to say, no, sorry. It's not our city policy to allow stores near that place. So that's what this would be the beginnings of a conversation on, of saying, we want to set an objective of, we may not get them all, but at least allowing them to exist, whether it's part of a big development or somebody's got an opportunity.
Absolutely, good idea, Paul.
I just need to stretch a little bit.
I mean, they have
I
to
know,
be
this
like
is a lot of
appropriately,
Oh,
the facade.
You're used to it.
100%. This is a very
We want to throw a
broad statement.
Wawa.
You don't want a
like,
7-Eleven.
A 7-Eleven or a Wawa.
Pigs that go
But
on
something like
forever.
Cider Mill, which like looks pretty and it fits in and yeah, it's great,
We're not.
Well,
right?
right,
And
a
it
recent
was there
example,
before the houses.
Yeah.
Well,
Cider Mill is there.
coffee place at Chili Drive.
right, a recent example of that is the
The
Red
or
Barn.
the red- Yeah.
The
Tilly
number of
Drive.
trips that has saved for all those employees on Tilly Drive every
That's what it
single
says.
day for, not driving to go get their sandwich.
Yeah.
That's a huge vehicle miles traveled win right there.
And you have a huge new development that's within walking distance, pretty easy.
Oh, and
walking
it's gonna be
distance in
coming
there, too.
around. I mean,
Right.
next phase whips around, doesn't it?
Last phase.
Was that number 22 in the pack that went around, Paul? Did you add that after? I just
No, that
wanted to
went-
see.
that went in.
It was okay, I just missed it.
So-
That makes sense to me.
So let's ask the question, because we're after 9 already.
Let's keep
Um,
going
yeah.
fast.
Can we speed through this? Do we need to do?
that's the
um,
last.
Well, there's one or
Three
two,
more,
right?
right?
Yeah, let's talk about it.
So do we
I know, I
wanna
just pulled that right out.
power
of my
through?
hat.
Do we wanna, we can come back again in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, I might suggest that maybe this is a good place to stop, because people are getting a little bit punchy, and I don't, this is the second other really big topic. And to just sort of say we're done, and
And there may also be some value now that we've all talked about this stuff of everyone coming back and taking a fresh look at the remaining ones or.
And putting it in the new format.
Yeah, I think once we see it in the new format, then it'll be easier to, sort of comment on it.
And when there are a couple of things that we, Need
Just
to
before,
look
there's
at.
one thing I want to throw out, because I was
the last
listening
few,
to a
including. the-
VPR podcast about this after this went out, this Mileage Smart Vermont program where, oh, okay, but it's not on here, right? Where people are incented to flip to vehicles that it gets at least 40 miles per gallon, and if you're low income, you get like a $5,000 rebate. That seemed pretty cool.
Yeah, and there's bills going through the legislature right now to continue to fund mileage smart, maybe add funding to it so that lower income folks can get
Yeah.
into, either used or new EVs and hybrids.
We could expand number 2 to specifically identify mileage smart.
Perfect.
Is there anything else on the agenda, my battery died, that you need to take care of? I didn't see if the minutes
I
from
did
last
not
time
send
went around,
minutes,
so we'll
so
do
I'll send
those
them around
next
here
time, okay. I don't think there are any other, oh wait, there was something else we were gonna talk about at the end, which was the schedule, but we kind of covered.
let's make sure so we've got your April 27th, and then we'll cover the next sectors. Let's be prepared to talk about that on the 14th.
Yep,
See, I don't trust me. I don't
okay,
trust my
anything
hard
else
drive.
urgent before we?
So we're gonna get homework that you're gonna reformat this and then we're gonna look at it again. Is that it?
Is that what we want?
Whatever you want us to prepare for April, we want to see.
Yeah, so we decided to go to the new format and Srini, Andrew and Donna are gonna work together to convert transportation into the new format.
No,
No,
Buildings.
we're doing that.
the new buildings, you probably have enough to be able to do it, right?
No, they're gonna do
Okay.
For
transportation.
transportation, right?
Yeah,
assume
got
that-
Okay,
plenty
sorry,
here.
sorry, right, the four of you will work
Buildings.
together in buildings and then you'll just take transportation.
That's it.
Yeah, we'll just button up the buildings.
Yeah.
Right, right.
And are
okay,
you gonna
sorry.
send it to us in advance of the meeting so we look at it and are prepared? Or will it just be in the packet? It'll be in the packet.
Might be tricky just because this month is a 2-meeting month.
Okay,
Um,
that's okay.
pulling up a calendar.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll
We'll
have
look
time
at
to get
When it's in
anything
the
back
packet,
to
we
us.
just have to
Yeah.
read step ahead so we can move a little faster. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be so impatient.
We're on a deadline, you're not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we have to turn stuff around to get it out to you by April 6th, which is next Wednesday, because then we're meeting the following week on the 14th.
Oh, that's right.
So in my mind, what I'm thinking is there would be a packet that's sent out late next week to inform the discussion on the 14th.
Okay,
Sound good?
we can read it over the weekend.
right.
Last item is to see if there's anybody from the public who had any feedback on anything that you just talked about.
Thank you. Anyone still with us on the phone?
Is there a way to see who's on?
Oh my God, congratulations.
Well, Marcy's still here
So
too, I think.
boring.
Linda Bailey dropped off about an hour ago.
I'm
Oh,
sure
there's
she
Mar-
did.
Marcy.
Yeah, but Marcy's still on. A good work. I mean, it's fabulous. The only thing I would offer is as you're working on fixing one issue, don't make another problem. You know, as you talk about, public transportation and extending it perhaps into different areas, then you may promote development in those areas, which then adds more fossil fuels, from the development. And of course, you're destroying the nature-based solutions in the process. So, beware, of good things that may cause bad things.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, and And by the way, I just want to comment on Paul Connor's comment about the Tilly Drive and how many miles it saved now that there's a little deli to eat. You know, we used to do in the old days, we used to bring our lunch, you know, we used to pack a lunch. So that would save a whole bunch of going out to eat, but that's just a sarcastic comment from an old woman. Anyway, keep up the good work.
Yes, thank you all very much. It's really interesting discussion and I appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thanks,
Thank
Marcy.
you.
Thank you.